Oh.
Well, where the hell have you been?
Well, it's been a busy few months.
I've been waiting.
You've just been here for 2 months.
Well, yeah, I need to know about the end of Time Lord Victorious. Ovs.
Yeah, I thought this place was starting to smell.
Can we get on, please?
Sure.
This is definitely going on the feedback review. Welcome to the Time Lord Victorious Canon Update. Hi, I'm Phil. Welcome back to my series where we break down what we learnt in each entry of the Time Lord Victorious Doctor Who multi-platform event. Today we'll be covering the novel All Flesh is Grass, which came out 2 months ago. Yeah, sorry if you've been waiting for this video and wondering where it's got to. Yeah. I've had a lot on with Christmas and various other things, so yeah, I just haven't found much reading time, and the book took me a little longer to read than I had planned to, let's just say. In fact, I only finished reading it last week, and then I had to script this video, so sorry about that. But I have now, so let's get on with the latest Time Lord Victorious canon update. Now, I always try not to give a beat-by-beat synopsis of what happens in the books, because this isn't what happened necessarily, it's a what we learned. What are the important things we learnt in the book? However, this book, a lot of stuff happens. In most chapters we find out something, so if you feel like you're getting a bit too much, apologies, I'm going to give you a spoiler warning. There will be spoilers for the book, but I'm not going to tell you absolutely everything that happens in the book. So if you're looking for that, if you're looking for a breakdown, chapter by chapter breakdown, that isn't what you're getting here. What you are getting though is what I think are the important beats and the important events and the important lore that we learned. This book picks up exactly where The Night, the Fall and the Dead, the last book, left us off, at least from the 10th Doctor's perspective. From the 8th and the 9th Doctors, we track back a little bit and sort of see just before how they arrived and how they arrived. So we go back in time in a little bit to cover their bits. But from the 10th Doctor's perspective, it pretty much picks up from the end of the last novel. The 9th Doctor arrives on a coffin ship, which we did learn at the end of the last book. What we didn't know at the end of the last book is how his own comic book series Monstrous Beauty was going to end, and this is not where we left him at the end of Monstrous Beauty. And we're not getting any more stories with 9 in this event, so I guess we're just not seeing how he ended up back on a coffin ship. We're told, however, that while Rose recovers from her vampire transformation, as we saw in Monstrous Beauty, 9 is helping some vampire underclass, who are vampires but not great vampires, find a home after they threw off their great vampire oppressors. See the comic for details of that. They are now referring to themselves as the Free Undead. The vampire Madame Akala is in charge of the coffin ship. She's a vampire who we've previously seen in the Tales of the Dark Times episode 4 mini-comic in the Comic Creator app. At that time, I wondered where her introduction might be, and when it wasn't in the 9th Doctor comic Monstrous Beauty, I assumed it must be in the book. But it looks like we're not getting how they met. The two do seem fairly unfamiliar with each other here, so I assume that they haven't met that long ago. Now, the 8th Doctor we did see set off with the Daleks to head to the Dark Times in the Big Finish story, The Enemy of My Enemy. And I guess we can assume he had a relatively uneventful journey from there to this point. In the opening section of this novel, the 10th Doctor blows up the Katura planet of Mordella, and the battle begins between him and his other selves and their uneasy allies, the vampires and the Daleks. Now, Brian, up until this point, was under the impression that the 10th Doctor had killed the person Brian had previously met who went by that name, the 8th, and assumed his identity and stolen his ship. We are told this, in fact, in the last book, and we saw Brian's previous encounter with the 8th Doctor in Big Finish's He Kills Me Not. So when the 8th Doctor shows up, he's surprised and starts to suspect that the Doctor wasn't completely straight with him about his nature. By the end of the book, though, it looks like Brian is completely up to speed with this nature and understands broadly regeneration. Brian has installed on the 10th Doctor's ship, which the 10th Doctor has named the Donna, various weaponry of races of the Dark Times, including Arachnos web gun, a Jaggerath warp thruster, and soul orbs of Gresh. During the battle, the Doctors make telepathic contact with each other, as we have seen them do in previous multi-Doctor stories. During the battle, the 10th Doctor's sonic screwdriver is broken, so he discards the Time Lord collar he uses and uses bits of it to repair his sonic. This is the origin of the sonic screwdriver we see in the Time Lord Victorious downloadable content from the VR game, and that's referenced in the Minds of Magnox audiobook. Facing inevitable defeat at the hands of the Daleks and vampires, Ten uses the Keturah energy generator to propel his ship away from the battle. Now let's talk about narrative gaps, because there are several throughout this novel. And we know from the timelines that were released by the BBC and from tweets by James Goss that several of the stories that are part of the Time Lord Victorious event in other media take place within these gaps. In particular, the mini-comics that were released through the Comic Creator app, the Minds of Magnox audiobook, and the Mission to the Known Dalek short story, which came with the Eaglemoss sets. Now, immediately after the Battle of Mordella, there is a 2-week gap between chapters 3 and 4. We're told the 10th Doctor and Brian have been travelling the Dark Times during this period, having adventures and seeking answers, while the Keturah numbers dwindled. This might be the period where Tales of the Dark Times episode 1 is set, but the 10th Doctor still has his Time Lord collar and his original sonic screwdriver, so it doesn't quite fit. And in fact, given those details, there is nowhere in this story, in the whole of Time Lord Victorious, where that could fit and make sense. So let's just assume it's a little continuity error, and it makes sense to have the mini-comic with him in the full robes fairly soon after the battle, followed then by the Minds of Magnox, in which he's had time to change out of the robes and into his usual pinstripe suit, albeit if the cover is to be believed, we've added mascara. During this time, the Daleks seem to be capturing species of the Dark Times, as seen in episode 2 of the mini-comics, and the 8th Doctor is still on board the Dalek ship initially, as seen in episode 3 of Tales of the Dark Times mini-comics. 9 has been scouting planets with Madame Ekala. We're told here it's for finding a suitable home for the free undead. This could be what we're seeing in episode 4 of the Tales of the Dark Times. The 8th Doctor abandons the Daleks after he's appalled at their actions experimenting on species. But he can't get to his TARDIS, so when the Daleks attack 9's coughing ship, he sneaks aboard and hitched a ride with the 9th Doctor. It's here that the final episode of Tales of the Dark Times probably takes place, with 8 and 9 looking for the 10th Doctor. They do catch up with the 10th Doctor when him and Brian are attempting to buy weapons through some brokers. The weapons that the brokers have offered him is Madame Ekala, who was found floating in space, presumably after the vampires' battle with the Daleks that I just referenced. The 9th Doctor says that's who they're here for, not 10, who's a lost cause. The Daleks are after Ekala too, presumably for the reason we're told about in one of the Eaglemoss booklets. They want to harvest vampire DNA to create a hybrid symbiote character, a stronger, undead Dalek. There's lots of swapping around who different characters are travelling with in different chapters, and in chapter 5, for instance, 8th Doctor arrives with the 9th Doctor, but leaves with the 10th Doctor. In chapter 8, after reuniting, the 9th Doctor leaves with Madame Ekala, vowing to save the Keturah, who are all slowly dying due to the 10th Doctor's actions in the last book and at the beginning of this one. Chapter 8 also has a scene that is exactly the same, word for word, as the beginning of one of the short stories in the Eaglemoss Dalek sets. This is the story Mission to the Known, so this is where that short story takes place. Daleks are experimenting on a race called Felonians, however, where the scene diverges is where the Dalek commander leaves the room. The short story follows him. The novel mostly stays with the scientists in the lab, but does go back to events with the commander we again have already seen in the short story. There is a 3-day gap here while the 8th Doctor and 10th Doctor together follow the trail of a Dalek ship. The 9th Doctor and Ekala are tracking down Keturah. This is another possible placement for their mini-comic, although that would place the comics out of chronological order with each other, while the other placement keeps them in the right order, so I'm tempted to just say it goes in the earlier spot. On page 103, it's revealed the Daleks are not part of the Keturah design. Speculating here, but possibly because they were a species created and mutated from another species. So when the 9th Doctor asked them to judge the Daleks, they refuse. Bit of information we get about the Keturah from one of the Keturah that the Ninth Doctor and Akala tracked down. They learned that the Keturah believed they were given their mission by the ruler of the universe. This particular Keturah they've encountered is called Inyit, and she has realised after encountering vampires that this myth probably wasn't true, and the power of death they discovered on Mordella was just a natural force. Inyit is on Bringi, the first planet the Keturah judged, something we saw at the beginning of the first book. She claims to be the last of the Keturah, the rest having already died out, and that the Keturah are so linked to the power they use that it is within them, distributed amongst them. But as the last, now all of it resides in her, so if she dies, it would be unleashed to disastrous effect. The 10th and 8th Doctors on a Dalek ship discover that the Daleks have been experimenting on a great vampire. They've upgraded from trying to get Madame Akala, clearly, and in doing so have created their symbiont, a Dalek with vampire DNA. The two escape the ship, but leave Brian behind. By chapter 12, the 10th Doctor is admitting to the other two Doctors that he acted hastily, and they were right to stop him. Yay, character growth! Brian is alone on the Dalek ship by this point. He discovers the symbiont and the ship's destination coordinates, which he tells the 10th Doctor on a phone call. It's Gallifrey. As we previously found out from another one of the Dalek short stories in the Eaglemoss sets, the Daleks are on a mission to wipe out Gallifrey before they can become Time Lords. And so the three Doctors unite to defend Gallifrey. Gallifrey here is confirmed to be relatively new to spacefaring, having only interacted really with vampires who they started a war with that would go on a very, very long time. I mean, we know from other non-Time Lord Victorious material that the war with the vampires was going on when the Time Lords were Time Lords and had mastery over time travel. So if it's starting here before they've even got that, before they've even got regeneration, before that timeless child has even turned up, then it must have been a very, very, very long war. The Daleks create a whole squad of symbiont undead Daleks who fight the Doctors on their ship, the Donna. The Daleks also send a symbiont to kill Inyit, the last of the Keturah, but this allows the Keturah to judge this hybrid species, thereby killing all the hybrid Daleks at once, which at this point was most of the Dalek fleet, because most of the Daleks had been converted, thus saving the Doctors from their current attack, which they looked like they were going to lose. After this, the 8th Doctor returns to the Dalek saucer and sets off an explosion in the drive core, crippling the ship and sending it hurtling into the vortex. This is the position we find it in at the beginning of the audio mutually assured destruction. Madame Akala seems to have changed somehow at the end. Something about absorbing part of the Keturah and the Bringi. It's all a bit vague. I didn't really get it. Fill me in the comments below if you did. The 9th and 10th Doctors mentioned to Brian that they will simultaneously remember and not remember this adventure, as is often the case when multiple incarnations of the same Time Lord meet each other. When the Doctors leave the Dark Times, Brian decides to stay behind, even saying he may pick his own name. And that, from a narrative point of view, kind of is the end of Time Lord Victorious, although it's not the end for individual character strands. We've had the continuing story of the 8th Doctor, which we've already had, as he goes onto the Dalek ship and blows it up and deals with the consequences of that. We've had more stories from the Daleks' point of view, as the same story happens with the 8th Doctor, and then additional ones as they're floating in the vortex, etc. And their time loop kind of starts again as the found Dalek from that destruction then informs the Emperor in the first place about this whole thing, which actually kicked off the whole thing of the Daleks in the first place. You know, bootstrap paradox. It's also not the last release. We've got a few more releases left in Time Lord Victorious, scattered quite widely. There is one that was meant to have come out already, Echoes of Extinction, which has a kind of A-side and B-side story, a 8th Doctor story and a 10th Doctor story. That has been delayed twice now and is now due to come out in April. That's been delayed because of the pandemic, basically, and it's coming out on vinyl exclusive to Asda, and they're not allowed to release the download until a week after it comes out in Asda. So because nobody's meant to be doing anything more than essential shopping at the moment, that's been delayed in Asda, which delays the download release. We've also got the interactive live theatre, immersive theatre event coming up this year, which I've got tickets for June, so once I've been to that, I will make sure I do a Canon update covering that as well. And there is one more, I believe, Eagle Moss set, which I don't know if it's got any stories in. If it does, I'll cover that too. But for the time being, for a couple of months, that's it for Time Lord Victorious. If you've enjoyed these videos, if they've been useful to you, then please do like, share, subscribe to this channel, all that jazz, because I will be doing more Doctor Who content here on the channel, as well as lots of other pop culture stuff like the MCU and Star Trek and DC comic stuff as well, all of that. So if you like your geeky pop culture, then hit that subscribe button for more of that from me. In the meantime, I guess I'll just see you soon. Sure. Okay, hopefully that'll do me on that bit.
You were so red.